Recently, I got a brand new green coffee to roast at home. It's an Ethiopian Sidama Keramo coffee, and I roasted it on the drum roaster here last week. I did a video on it. It was absolutely a delicious coffee. I loved it, but it wasn't the profile that I was aiming for. So this week, I'm using a small handheld roaster called the Hive, and I'm going to try to attempt to roast the profile that I originally wanted to roast and to see how that turned out. So stick around. All right, thanks so much for joining me today and welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab. A lot of great comments last week with that coffee that I roasted, an Ethiopian Sidama Keramo coffee, and it was absolutely delicious. Gave some beautiful citrus orange notes, a little bit of a gentle lemon acidity as well, and there was an underlying sweetness, and it was just a really enjoyable cup of coffee. But it wasn't the profile that I wanted. I ended up roasting basically a 48% dry, a 30% browning, and a 22% development. It wasn't really what I wanted, but it ended up being, like I mentioned, a delicious cup of coffee. What I was really aiming for was a 45, 37, 17, something like that. And so that's what I am trying to aim for here with this roast, and I'm using the Hive roaster. And I wanted to show you, for those who haven't seen the Hive roaster before, the Hive roaster is a really interesting design. This is the bottom portion of the Hive, and you can see that it's not just like a saucepan with a lid or a dome lid. Here's the dome. This is the dome that goes on the Hive, so it kind of looks like an old-fashioned popcorn popper, and there's the hole in the center. But on the opposite side, the heat is heating here, but you've got air that can come in this bottom portion of the roaster and flow around on the inside of the dome. And what that does is that helps promote roasting, but it also seems to incinerate the smoke. Very little smoke coming out of the Hive, and it incinerates a lot of the chaff as well. It's really a cool little handheld roaster. This version that I have happens to have a probe, a K-type probe in it that goes into the bean mass. So I am reading bean temperature while I'm roasting this coffee. So definitely really cool. And I'm roasting 150 grams of the Ethiopian Sidama Keramo coffee. So the Hive roaster is one of the tools that I used. I also used the cooling tray from my roaster here just to be able to pour the coffee into it. I ended up going outside because it's still cool here where I live, and the coffee cooled off really quick. Use that coffee tray, cooling tray to do that. I also have a roast log worksheet, and this roasting log worksheet was created by Timothy Harrelson. Timothy's a viewer here on the channel, and after watching some of my videos, he went ahead and created his own worksheet and shared it with me. And I'll actually include a link to this worksheet that I'm using here for you to be able to download for free. I'm also using the coffee roasting timer app, but I'm only using it more or less as a stopwatch. I used my phone to be able to video this roast, and so I have an old phone that is disconnected from the cellular network that I'll use just to be able to get internet and to use for a timer for the roaster. But I'm just using it here for the timer itself. And then, of course, my digital readout is going to show me my bean temperature throughout the roast. Again, I'm roasting 150 grams of green coffee. So I've charged the roaster. 317 degrees is what I've charged it at. And for our metric friends, I've also included the temperature in Celsius along the way. Immediately I have a medium flame and the hive elevated, and I'm paying attention to what's happening to the heat. I've got, and I didn't mention it, on this sheet that I've got here that Timothy made, I've already written my temperatures down. I've written the entire profile down in seconds, in 30-second increments with a temperature goal that I want to attain. So, as you'll notice, when the times and temperatures show up every 30 seconds, you'll see the target temperature that I want to attain, as well as the time. And that's not necessarily the temperature that you're reading when you look at the Digital Dome's readout. So here we got 1 minute, 237 degrees. That's not what you see on the readout, the little red display there. That's the temperature that I want to be at. Here's my turning point. It gives me an idea of where I'm at with my roast progression and the momentum. So what's going to happen is that I'm behind the game on this right now. Not by a lot, but I'm definitely a little bit behind on my temperatures. But as I get closer to that 4-minute goal for dry, I get within just a couple of degrees of my target, and that's perfect. So 234 degrees. So I am adjusting the height of the hive from the flame to either increase or decrease my rate of rise and the pace of the roast. I'm constantly trying to keep the beans moving. At 2 minutes, 271 degrees is my target temperature. Alright, at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, my target temp is 288 degrees. You can see that I'm about 10 degrees behind, maybe 12 degrees behind. And that's not too bad because I know that I've got another minute and a half to 2 minutes to catch up. And my next target is going to be 305. And so I'm at 294 degrees. The goal, as I mentioned before, is to keep the coffee moving. We don't want scorching. We don't want this coffee to sit and rest. And I know that when I start to approach my dry time, I'm going to want to look at the coffee to see what color it is. Here's 322 degrees is my target, and I'm at 323 degrees. So I'm like right there. I've caught up on my roast. We're going to keep this coffee going, and I've got the light lit up on my head. I've got a headband with an LED light. I've turned that on, and I'm going to be looking inside the coffee roaster, but I don't want to stop too long. You can see it was maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and there is yellow at 4 minutes. I hit my target at 339 degrees. I was a little ahead on my temperature, but I hit my target time of 4 minutes. And this is really an interesting point. I will find myself ahead or behind on my target times and temperatures, but when it comes to getting to my waypoints, my milestones, my events, so dry end or first crack, or when we drop, all of those events I nail within a couple of seconds. So the timing of the events is really important to me. That's my priority. My rate of rise is not going to be very graceful here because I think this was my second attempt using the hive and trying to get this profile. And it takes some finagling, it takes some practice, and that's part of the fun of coffee roasting, trying to figure it all out. But It's 150 grams of coffee, so I'm not wasting a lot of coffee. It's not like I'm roasting a pound in my roaster here. But the second attempt, I'm getting right on with my event times, but I am making adjustments along the way, up and down with my rate of rise to try to make sure that I land on my mark. All right, we are at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. You can see that I'm 15 degrees ahead of where I really wanted to be as far as target temperatures go. That's one of the things that I noticed about this coffee. It happened in the drum, and it's happening here in the hive. Once this coffee gets hot, it really wants to take off. It absorbs that heat really well, and then it just kind of ignites and just wants to run. And so I'm trying to control the heat to make sure that it just doesn't run away from me. The first roast that I had, it did run away from me, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit, but it ended up being quite a short roast. All right, we are at the 375 degree mark. So what I did is I slowed the roast down, and while my time is passing, my temperature hasn't climbed a lot, so that I can bring myself back into alignment with my target times and temperatures. 374 degrees, 6.5 minutes, and now I'm only 3 degrees away from where I need to be. And I'm okay with that. Again, if you're looking at this as a nice, perfect rate of rise, descending rate of rise, it's not happening here in this roast. But the end result is I got the phase times that I wanted to get with this. See how high I'm holding the roaster right now? That's because I need to back off on my heat a little bit. The heat's still rising. It's still making its way up to the bottom of the roaster, but it's just not down on the flame. And now I'm bringing it down a little bit lower to try to, bring it back into a nice temperature increase that I'm aiming for. By the way, if you are watching this video and you like what you see, hit the like button. That really helps me out. Of course, please subscribe to this channel. That is awesome. But hitting the like button is something that's really going to help this show up in the search engines here within the YouTube network. All right, we are at 384 degrees. This coffee loves to crack. It's popping away, as you can hear. And my goal is to have a nice development time with a target of around 17%. I don't want to rush the development, but I don't want to extend the development. My goal is to try to attain and keep the acidity, the fruitiness of the coffee with a little bit of balance so that it's not a real intense cup of coffee. And so you can see here I'm raising the hive off the flame to slow the roast down so that it's not going to move so quickly to my end temperature. And that's kind of what happened. Like I mentioned, it loves to take off, and it did that. So now what's going to happen is my temperature is going to hover around the same temperature as this roast continues to progress. The coffee is still roasting through, the heat is still penetrating the bean, but the temperatures aren't increasing anymore in this last little bit of the roast. My goal is to drop the coffee at 9 minutes and 17 seconds. I've turned my flame off because I'm coasting the roast right now. We've got about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and dump this coffee. You can see it just went down 1 degree barely, and then I dropped the coffee. 397 degrees, 9 minutes and 17 seconds. And I'm going to take this coffee outside and get it cool real quick. Here's what it looks like. And with the lighting, it looks like it's an uneven roast, but it's a fairly even roast. There are a few lighter beans in there, but I was really happy with the quality of the roast color, the roast temperature. It's definitely in the ballpark of what I was aiming for, within a degree or so temperature-wise, and with the phase percentages. All right, so now it's time to take a look at the roast profile we ended up with. Our total roast time was 9 minutes and 17 seconds. we had 43% of our time devoted towards dry, 39% devoted towards browning, and 17% devoted towards development. That is where I was aiming for originally when I wanted to roast that on this roaster here. I got my total roast time of 8 minutes and 30 seconds on the drum, but I didn't get my phase percentages. It was a 50, 30, 20 on this drum. Well, it was actually 48, 30, 21, something like that on the drum. This coffee here, I hit my phase percentages, but it went longer than I wanted. So I ended up with a 9 minute and 17 second total roast time. That's 50 seconds, 50 seconds longer roasting this roast on the Hive than when I roasted on the drum. The difference is that the coffee tastes different. It's not the same coffee. It's the same coffee, but it doesn't taste like the same coffee. There were no citrus notes like last week. This week there was blackberry and some dried fruit notes that were in there. There was an underlying sweetness last week and this week. This sweetness really hung on the tongue. My son tasted it. He said it was like stevia on the tongue. And then there was, like I mentioned, a dried fruit note that was in there, and it was a very clean finish on this cup. Last week on the roaster, it had a little bit of a roasty note, kind of a little bit of a dirty, lingering note that kind of hung around on the taste buds. So it's interesting. Two totally different roasts with the same coffee, and you're getting some different notes. I am swinging back and forth between hitting my target on my total roast time and hitting my phase percentages on these different roasts. What I really need to do is get an 830 like last week with the phase percentages from this week. So I'm going to try that again next week, and I'm probably going to be using a different roaster to do that. So I hope you would join me and watch me do this and then see if I can hit the target on that. Also, if you've enjoyed watching this video, be sure to hit that like button. That really helps me out. It tells YouTube that something good is going on here, and those searching for home coffee roasting, my videos will show up for them. Subscribe, that really helps me out as well. All right, questions for you. Have you tried roasting a new coffee and it seems like you can't make the times or the temperatures that you're aiming for? After several roasts with this coffee, one of the things that I've learned is the coffee really likes to absorb that heat and then take off with it. So it's a little challenging to control the heat on this coffee. Have you tried to do something like this? Have you used different types of roasting devices with the same coffee? That's what I'm doing here. I'm using different roasters. The Hive tends to be a very flexible roaster, and so if I would have tried maybe a third time to roast this coffee, because I did 2 roasts on the Hive with this coffee, and the third time may have been the charm. It seems like I got my roast time or I got my phase times, but I didn't get both. Have you experienced that where you're not able to nail your roast because you were off on your times or your phase percentages? Share those comments with me as well. It's interesting. Have you had a coffee that you seem like every time you've roasted it, it's tasted differently? That could be because your profile has changed. That's what we're experiencing between this roast and the roast from last week. Share your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear those as well. Well, I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time.